Welcome to a special edition of Tech Talk with Troy. We'll get started in just a moment. Prepare yourselves for insightful discussion that will empower your business to deliver top-tier solutions to your clients.
Hello, I'm Troy Barnes with Residio's First Alert Pro Premier Partner Program. We have with us today Adil, Megan, and Ian with Eero to give us a webinar, give us some instruction, great information on Wi-Fi, the good, the bad, how to make your Wi-Fi work. And we have asked them to present this webinar, giving them some things that we'd like to talk about, and calling it Demystifying Wi-Fi. Turn it over to you, Ian.
How's it going, guys? My name's Ian. I do all of the technical training at Eero, so I do a lot of our stuff for our agents, for customer service, sales, and technicians. So put together this brief thing, just kind of going over like major issues that people run into with Wi-Fi, why so many Wi-Fi installations end up not being suitable for, whenever. Basically, we're going to go through and answer some of the questions as to, why we have so many issues with Wi-Fi in everyday deployments. Why we'll have issues with things like cameras and stuff like that, and single access point homes, and what we can do to try to resolve that. If you got any questions, you can always put it in the chat. Otherwise, there will also be a Q&A at the end as well. Great. So we're going to go over a couple of different topics. We're going to cover, the problems with Wi-Fi, some of the main challenge points and issues that customers can run into in their deployments, the benefits of a mesh network, any mesh network, and how that kind of solves some of those pain points. We'll also talk about the Eero for Pro Installers program, and then if we've got a little bit of time at the end, we'll also talk about some benefits for Eero as well. And again, if you guys stay at the end, we can also take any questions as well. All right, so let's talk about the problem with Wi-Fi. Naturally, relying on Wi-Fi can be pretty painful. If you're dealing with, especially if we're in a situation where we're using like a combo unit provided by the service provider, these are typically single access point installations, right? They're meant for a lot of purposes, and they do a lot of things. In a lot of cases, with some of them, they're even doing like cable for their television stuff. They're not really focused on providing full coverage for an entire house, especially if we're talking about larger installations, right? Maybe they'll surface fine for single floor homes, maybe more likely apartments. But the moment that we start adding additional floors, or we have a larger square footage, we can definitely run into issues. And then trying to actually utilize the device to actually get the most out of it, make any settings changes, doing anything like that, usually fairly unintuitive, right? Logging into a GUI, right? Trying to figure out what the default credentials are. None of it is strictly user friendly. One of the biggest problems, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is that we're typically dealing with like a single access point. So this red circle here kind of shows a typical access point for a single access point, where if we're dealing with a multi-dwelling unit, or we're dealing with a multi-floor unit or anything like that, getting that Wi-Fi coverage everywhere just isn't really feasible for a single device. It's not as if that one device isn't trying its best, right? But it's just not the best solution for those types of floor plans. What ends up making things worse, though, is that even if we had a single floor, right, we can run into what's called attenuation. Attenuation is always present in Wi-Fi, and it's the idea that as the signal goes further, right, if I've got my access point in my living room and I'm trying to get Wi-Fi out, 2-3 bedrooms down, that signal's getting weaker. And that would happen even if it was in a open area, right? If I was in an open box or something like that, and I didn't have any walls and I didn't have any furniture, I would still run into attenuation. But of course, I don't live in an open box, right? I've got walls, I've got couches, I've got a bed to sleep on, right? And every single one of those items attenuates the signal. Whenever I say every one of them, I literally mean everything, right? Everything attenuates Wi-Fi. One of my favorite fun facts is that the human body, right, is made out of 60% water. Otter's a fantastic Wi-Fi attenuator, which means that we are fantastic Wi-Fi attenuators, right? So you can literally stand in between your access point and your phone, and you can watch the signal degrade. Now, if you're standing right next to it, it's not going to do it by a lot, but it will degrade it because we are attenuating that signal. Naturally, the density of the object is going to cause more attenuation, right? So if it's drywall or something thin, it'll attenuate it, but it's not going to be a dramatic attenuator. It will obviously still cause some effect, but the thicker the material, once we start talking about, things like brick walls or marble countertops or tile backsplash, stuff like that, starts to attenuate it even heavier. If you're unlucky to have something like an elevator shaft or something like that between two different access points, if we were doing like a business installation, trying to get Wi-Fi on the other side of a elevator shaft is pretty poor. I'm sure most of y'all have seen, you get inside the elevator and your cell service drops out. And it's because you're in a steel box that's attenuating the signal very heavily. So let's take a look at what this looks like in the real world. So here I've got a couple of images that are of an empty floor plan, right? So there's no furniture in here. So obviously, as we just covered, furniture and stuff like that would attenuate it more. But here we've got kind of a 2-bedroom premium apartment, I guess we'll call it. And we've got our access point here in the middle, or not in the middle, in the living room. And the light, the brightness of the light is indicating how strong our signal is, right? And so the brighter the light, the stronger the signal. So as we can see, as we go throughout these adjacent rooms, we can see that we've still got pretty decent coverage, right? And even in these far rooms, in any place where we still have kind of direct access or is immediately close to the access point, we still have pretty good coverage. But once we get to the far ends of the room, we start getting not great coverage, right? And then we get into this closet up here in like the top right-hand corner of the apartment. Suddenly we have no coverage, right? And of course, that's exactly where either a lot of access points themselves would be placed, and or, if we did have our access point here in the living room like this, this is where, someone's going to want to put their gaming computer or something like that so they can turn their closet into a pseudo office or something like that, right? So trying to get coverage everywhere ends up being super important, even if it may not appear so at first glance. So one of the most important factors whenever we're talking about an access point and trying to get good Wi-Fi coverage everywhere is placement. Right. As we adjust the placement, you're able to see, you'll cover more of one area and less of another one, right? So you can see here as we move this access point up and down this living room, notice how on the far ends of the rooms on the right-hand side, they kind of blip in and out of coverage depending on where we place this access point. Notice even more so how whenever we slap this access point up against the wall or put it in this little corner, how we kind of blip out of coverage on the other side of the room. This is why one of the things that we always recommend is not to have an access point like directly flush up against a wall unless it's one that's actually designed to be like a ceiling mounted access point or something, because those ones are designed to account for that. But most regular traditional routers or router combo units aren't meant to be directly up against the wall like that. It can cause reflectivity issues. We also want to avoid being in a corner like this. Like you can see, this is probably like a fireplace or something right here. And that fireplace is going to choke out that signal if you place it directly in that corner. This is also another great one for showing the idea that every little change, every little bit of movement has a big impact on what your overall coverage could look like.
So Ian, I just learned something.
Yes.
Having a access point up against a wall, my Eero access point. Yeah, I didn't realize that it being against the wall, because I made a shelf to put it on against the wall, is causing an issue. Thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, even if it's like a couple inches off the wall, that is still better than it being flush, like touching the wall. And again, there are plenty of access points out there that are designed to be up on a wall. That's one thing. But if it's just if it doesn't look like it was designed to be flush up against a wall, yeah, you're technically impeding your coverage a little bit. In this image, this is one of my favorite ones. This is like a 650 square foot apartment or something like that. It's not a terribly large installation, right? And we've got our access point sitting here in the living room, right? course, that's going to be where the modem's at, so we don't have a big say in where the modem gets installed in a lot of cases, right? Especially in apartment complexes where it's not like we could run new lines through them. And so here, we've got a single access point. We would think that because we're in an apartment, we should absolutely have coverage throughout this entire one-bedroom apartment, right? It's not that large of an installation. Yet we can see here that in this one bedroom, right, we've got pretty poor coverage. We've got pretty weak signal. The main reason for this as to why we're seeing this reduced coverage is really going to be this bathroom here, right? This bathroom is directly between our access point and the one bedroom in the house. And of course, as we talked about, the bathroom has tons of great things that are really fantastic at killing your Wi-Fi signal, right? So mirrors, tile backsplash, water pipes, right? Sometimes those pipes are even metal if the place is old enough, right? Lots of great, the physical installation of like the tub or the toilet or anything like that. All of that stuff is going to be great for impeding that Wi-Fi coverage. A lot of times bathrooms also have like a fire break in the wall, depending on when it was built as well. So there's lots of things that can impede that coverage, so that way we're no longer getting Wi-Fi on the other side of that bathroom. I actually used to have an apartment that was very similar to this layout. And what used to happen is whenever I would close my bedroom door, I could no longer stream YouTube or watch Netflix, right? I had to leave my door open to get a consistent enough connection, because that was the only thing that wasn't attenuating the signal.
I just wanted to show everyone something that can happen. Okay, so if you look at the top left picture up there, you see the access point is sitting next to that door on the edge of the shelf. I would say about a week ago, the camera, which over on the right-hand side, it's on the eave of that little shed where the arrow's pointing, the camera lost connection. And I first thought, well, maybe, somebody tripped a breaker out here on this shed. So I went and checked the electric in the shed, and sure enough, everything's powered up. So I came back in the house and I discovered that my wife had moved the access point into the corner. Of course, this is a brick house. And just moving it that far into the corner lost all connection. And, it doesn't have the best signal out there, even when it's on the corner of the shelf or the edge of the shelf. You'll see what the signal strength is. And this is after I moved the access point. The camera reconnected with a -63. So that's in that okay range. But if you look at the minimum signal, 99, so it remembered that it had a low signal previously, and that's basically if I see anything 70 or worse, I'm thinking there will be problems. And then you've got the best signal that it's had is -57 dB. So that's one of those things where moving an access point just a little bit is going to change where the signal is going and how much signal is getting there.
Yeah, and that's a great example of in a lot of cases, our hands might be tied unless we wanted to turn around and run new wire or something like that, which not every customer is going to be okay with, right? We're even moving the access point, the distance of the Ethernet cable or the distance of the power cable can make a surprising amount of difference, right? It's not going to fix every solution, but especially if it's put in an unideal location, like, in the corner or in a cabinet, in the side of an entertainment center, right? Any of those things, trying to adjust that placement so we can get it outside of that immediate interferer can make a surprising impact.
And if I could add one more thing there,
Yeah.
usually those blinds inside that window are closed, and those blinds are metal. So not only did I have window there attenuating, door attenuating, brick attenuating, but I had a metal shield up of those blinds. So I'll quit adding now.
No, you're fine. So here I've got a basic chart about the going over what's called the RSSI, as he's kind of already alluded to, right? The values that we see here are extremely important. This short is RSSI is short for Receive Signal Strength Indicator. You don't need to memorize that or anything. I'm not going to be testing you after this, but it's the idea of that there's a numeric value right behind those Wi-Fi bars that we're seeing. And the Wi-Fi bars, there's actually a lot of stuff that goes behind the scenes, right? Recognizing like our modulation and our SNR and a whole bunch of other stuff. But one of the biggest important factors is going to be that RSSI, making sure that we've got great signal to this device so it can have a great connection. Right. And so the idea is that we want to be as close to zero as possible because it's a negative number, right? Lower signal, lower strength, closer to zero, better strength, right? And so realistically, if you're 0 to 40, right, you're basically in the same room as that access point, right? If you're 40 to 50, you're generally one room over, pretty nearby. And then this 51 to negative 65, this is kind of the, 2 rooms over, 35, 45 feet away, where you're not right there next to that access point, but you're kind of at the outside limit of making sure that we've got consistent, reliable, low latency signals. So whenever we're dealing with things like cameras, or we're wanting to make sure that we don't disconnect at the start of a Zoom meeting or anything like that, we need to make sure that we've got great coverage here, so that way we can get that reliable packet delivery. You can still have signal beyond this, right? But as we keep getting weaker and weaker, we can no longer rely on that reliable signal. And if we're in a noisy environment, you can start to immediately have problems once you pass this threshold. If you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different answers for what kind of their cutoff is for really bad RSSI. But the one that I always go with is like, it's even if you're in a great airspace with really great noise and everything like that, once you pass negative 75, all pretenses of getting reliable packet delivery kind of goes out the window. But realistically, if we know that we can keep our devices, especially if, not our house, we can't sit there and start adjusting things, right? If we're doing an installation for somebody else, if we can make sure that before we leave, their stuff is at least better than a negative 65, then we can kind of normally walk out pretty confident that things are going to work as intended.
Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to show you here is finding the signal strength on AlarmNet 360. So you can go to, depending on the screens that you're on, if you go to device status, there's a new tab under device status called cameras, and you can click that and it will bring up all of your cameras, and you can click on diagnostics from there. You can also, from your AlarmNet 360 modify page, account overview, there's a tab that says cameras, and you can bring that up. It gives you the list of cameras, and you can select your camera, choose the view diagnostics, and it brings the screen up. So currently we're setting it a negative 65 or negative 56 dB here. Tells us which Wi-Fi we're connected to. And it also allows us to do a speed test. You see the wireless transmission rate there. If you click that little blue test button there, recycle button, it will actually start a remote test on that device where, from that device. You can do it from anywhere you are, but what it's going to do is it's going to give you the speed, give you a speed test from that camera back to the access point it's connected to. After you run that, it'll show you that number. If you ever make any changes and move the device, the icon in the upper right-hand corner of this picture will refresh your signal strength if you've made any movements or changes. So could you click on the screen one more time? There we go. See that little red, it was red, now it's blue question mark next to signal strength. So that right there is going to give you a chart to show you what the signal strength levels are. Okay. So if you forget what those numbers are, you can click that, and it'll bring that up on the screen for you at any time. So that way, the important thing is, and like you said, if you ask 10 different people what good Wi-Fi is or where your cutoff range is, you're going to get different range, get different measurements. that's why it's important to know what, what is recommended. I mean, there is somewhat of an industry standard of, this chart here. He says -75, I say -70. I would definitely say -75 as well. Maybe I'm a little bit of a pessimist with my -70, but nonetheless, he's actually more of an expert than I am, of course, and that's why I wanted them to share their information with us. Ian?
Yeah, and I mean the important thing, and I'm not going to go too much into Wi-Fi theory and really bore y'all, but the important thing to know there is that the number will change depending on what place you're located in, right? Because there's also this idea of trying to make sure that we're overpowering any ambient noise, so that way we can keep our signal to noise ratio up. So if we were, I don't know, next to a power plant or something like that, there's going to be really high ambient noise from all the electromagnetic interference. So suddenly that -75 is no longer acceptable, because we have to have our devices closer together to overcome that noise. Now that's an extreme example, but you get the idea, right? Every place is going to be different. And so what number works for one person is not going to work for everybody.
Yes, that is correct. We deal with that with our cellular devices. We have signal quality that we have to take into account on our cellular devices.
Yep. So always trying to go for the best and trying to make sure that we've got proper coverage and get as close to zero as humanly possible is always going to be a smart decision, right? The only time that I wouldn't really be too concerned about it is if you're in that rare scenario where somehow you got called out for no issue at all, which I don't think that those really happen these days. All right, so let's talk about mesh networks, right? So we talked about some of the problems that we can run into whenever we're dealing with single access point installations, and some of the pain points that we can have and what it is that we're trying to overcome. So let's talk about why a mesh network can try to help those, right? With any mesh network out there, regardless of what manufacturer is making it, there's kind of some core consistencies that the industry as a whole has kind of seen. Number one is that there's going to be an intuitive app interface, almost certainly. These are generally more geared towards being user friendly, so that way you're not logging into that website GUI, right? Trying to know what the default credentials are. It's normally fairly straightforward and easy for people to go in and make changes to their network or adjust settings if they need to optimize things. Another one that seems silly but can be underrated is an aesthetically pleasing design, right? If I've got this monstrosity of a router with all these antennas looking like a spider or something like that, a lot of customers aren't going to want to have that prominently displayed in their house, right? The moment that they see something like that, they're very likely to put it inside of inside of the cabinet, inside of the entertainment center or something, hide it away in the corner, where it's suddenly now, as we just discussed, that can negatively impact our coverage, right? So making something that's pleasing to have out and displayed prominently increases the chances that we're actually going to get really great coverage. And then, of course, all of these, mesh networks out there, they're going to have multiple access points, right? And we can do it, flexibly. So with Eero, for example, as long as it's got Ethernet ports, any Eero can be the gateway Eero, and then any of them can either be wired or wireless access points. So we can, if we need to run a new line, so that way we can get fantastic coverage for one of our what we call a wired leaf node, or kind of that secondary Eero out there, you can do that. But if it's not a deployment where we're comfortable or able to run wires, great, it can go wireless as well, and it can still boost out that coverage, right? And so that flexibility in maximizing the coverage can make sure that we've got great signal no matter where we're located in the house. Naturally, right? So any mesh network that's out there is at a bare minimum at least gonna provide those additional access points to make sure that we've got great coverage everywhere. However, one of the benefits that we've got at Eero is that kind of every Eero, really more like a router than a standard access point. So we can kind of make sure that we've got fantastic coverage, and we can optimize our coverage no matter where it is that we're located in the house. This also allows us to scale a little bit more, as we'll get into in a minute. But the idea here is that we can share this load, and we can make sure that all of these devices across this house, especially as people are getting more and more devices in their house, we can kind of distribute that load and make sure that we're not overwhelming our network, as we'll get into shortly. Now, since I just mentioned that a lot of these mesh networks can have wireless access points, right? I'm sure you guys have also dealt with like wireless repeaters or wireless extenders and stuff like that. Kind of wanted to go over just a quick pro tip on trying to optimally place a device like that, because we just talked about attenuators and trying to get maximize our coverage, right? So whenever we're installing any of these, and again, this is true for any access point, not just for Eero, there's a couple of things that we can try to keep in mind. My recommendation is always to imagine, let's just say, for example, we had two Eeros. If we've got them wirelessly connected to each other, I always recommend that we kind of imagine there's a string, like an invisible string going to these two Eeros, okay? Everything that passes through that string, every wall, every appliance, every anything is going to weaken that string. Once that string gets too frail, it snaps and you lose coverage and you no longer have consistent connection on your wireless extender, mesh repeater, whatever it is, right? So here I've got a 3-bedroom apartment. And our modem or our ONT is coming in the living room area, and so we plug our main access point there in the living room, right? Because we're tied to that location at this point. Now, for the sake of dramatization, I'm not going to say this is an actual range of any real Eero or any other product out there, but just for the sake of argument, this blue circle is its total coverage range, and so as we can see here, we've got plenty of locations on the other side of the apartment in these 2 bedrooms here that don't have adequate coverage, right? So we need to expand on that coverage so we can get great signal for everybody that's living in this home. So a really common installation would be something like this, where we kind of create a Venn diagram, right? We place the Eero wherever the signal's weak, and we can make sure that we've got great coverage everywhere in the premise, right? But there's a problem here. The problem is that we're passing right through the kitchen. Okay. Kitchen, again, is another one. I mentioned bathrooms earlier. Kitchen is even more so. Fantastic Wi-Fi killer, right? Again, we've got tile backsplash, we've got water pipes, right? We've got this, probably metal or ceramic sinks, but then we also have the appliances, right? We've got a giant refrigerator. We've got that microwave that every time it kicks on, it's sending out electromagnetic interference, right? We've got lots of appliances added into the mix that are also going to make getting Wi-Fi consistently through a kitchen like this really, really difficult. And so if we're imagining that string, suddenly that string is a lot weaker, and there's always a chance that as we leave this installation, that we can have concerns that this wireless unit might disconnect, right? Now, again, to the point that we were making before, every little movement matters, right? Every little adjustment that we can make matters. So in this case, just moving it one wall over, right? So we were on one side of the closet wall. We're now just going to move to the other bedroom. Suddenly now we're both going through this hallway and avoiding the kitchen and the bathroom here, right? And so we're able to try to kind of walk the line in what would otherwise be a fairly difficult installation. And there's other places that you could place this thing as well, right? But the idea is trying to avoid those interferes so we can get a great signal to these wireless nodes so they can repeat out a great signal. But this isn't always where the small adjustments stop, right? As we can see here, we're also passing directly through a TV. It's a giant glass screen, right, with a PCB and effectively an appliance with how large these things are, drawing back a ton of power, right? So trying to make sure that we don't have a TV directly between our access points is always important. So again, making those small adjustments to the point that we were talking about before, right? We've got, 6 feet worth of cable or whatever. Great. Move that access point to the other side of the TV. Now we've made sure that even in this difficult situation where we don't have many great locations to be able to place an access point, we know we can walk out of there confident that we know that we've got the best setup possible, so that way we can get a strong, consistent connection, and that we've got Wi-Fi everywhere.
All right, thanks, Ian. So if you look at the screen, we see the different Wi-Fi access points. We see some Pro Touch keypads. These are the wireless keypads, And I wanted to demonstrate a good and bad placement for whether it be the keypad or the access points and how they relate to each other. One of the things that I have actually demonstrated in my own house here with my Eero access points is when I am basically virtually identical, even spacing between two different access points. Thanks, Ian. I was pointing on my screen and not realizing that no one could see that. So when it's in that placement there where that red keypad is, I have seen this keypad, work for days and days.
Part. Let's talk about cameras for a minute, because cameras are typically the ones that end up getting the both the poorest signal, but are also the ones that we need to have the best signal going to them, right? Because we want to be able to quickly pull up on our phone and see what's on the camera feed. And if it's taken 15 seconds for it to load, that's not a great feeling, especially if you're trying to make sure that everything's all right, right? There's a couple reasons for that. The main one, though, is we're dealing with exterior walls, right? A lot of times it's going to be a brick wall, right? But even if it isn't, it's still going to be a thicker material, but it's also going to have insulation in those walls, right? There's probably going to be a fire break depending on when the house was built. We've got a lot of things stacked in our against us to prevent us from getting great coverage outside of the home. Another example is like stucco, right? If they've got stucco, trying to get Wi-Fi beyond stucco can be really, really difficult. So trying to make sure that we've got great coverage wherever we're placing a Wi-Fi enabled camera is always really, really important, and can take a little bit extra consideration, especially if we're doing multiple cameras, right? Naturally, as dumb as it sounds, one of the things that I've always done whenever I've gone out to on site is that I'll get up on my ladder and I'll put my phone right next to where I want to have the camera, right? And I'll double check and I'll make sure whatever my coverage is going to that phone, right? If the phone's got good coverage in that spot, then the camera might get good coverage in that spot. Not an apples to apples test, because the antennas on my phone aren't the exact same antennas that are on the camera, but it's a good idea to just double check and make sure that, hey, I've got really great coverage here. I feel confident that whenever I install this camera, everything's going to be fine. Or you put your phone there and you realize, oh no, this is actually really bad coverage. I need to improve coverage in this area, either by adjusting the placement of an access point or maybe even adding an additional access point, right? Naturally, if we do have sufficient coverage within the house, what I always recommend is, if we've got an Eero or another access point or whatever, try to move it as close to that exterior wall as possible, especially if we're dealing with a situation like in Troy's photo earlier, where we're actually dealing with like a detached property and we're trying to get Wi-Fi coverage to a property that's 30, 40 feet away. Having that Eero or having that access point next to the wall, next to that exterior wall, is going to go a long way in making sure that we've got good coverage, not just on the side of the house, but beyond the house, right?
Yeah, and one of the things we want to remember about our cameras is this particular camera also has the the PoE ability to connect. So a little bit later, he's going to show you some information about a Eero PoE switch that, and I think I used the wrong designation for that, but he'll talk about that in a minute. So just wanting to let you know about that, because I know Quentin's using one of those and seems to be working great for him.
Excellent. Yeah. We definitely have an Eero. We call it the Eero PoE Gateway is what its street name is. But yeah, I mean, it's a looks like a giant switch, so that's totally fine. But yeah, we'll supply PoE for both access points and for any other device, right? It's not just limited to powering Eeros. We can power cameras, we can power anything that uses PoE as a standard. Now, one of the things that can happen with any router system, right, is that as time goes on, I kind of alluded to this earlier. There's I think it's 3 times more devices from 2020 to 2015, I think was the number that I had seen. My years might be a little bit off on that, but the point stands that year over year, the amount of client devices that are connecting to a network just keeps growing exponentially. Every device these days seems to be getting smart. right? Smart light bulbs, blinds, coffee machines, microwaves. I mean, I've got a GIF here of a toilet, and that's not something that I made up. Kohler actually makes a smart toilet. Mirrors. I mean, just about everything happens to want to connect to Wi-Fi these days. And what can happen is, if once we start getting tons and tons of these devices connected to a single access point, we run into a couple of problems, right? We run into problems with bandwidth distribution, right? Some routers out there may have trouble handling even a couple of devices talking simultaneously, let alone, 30, 40, 50 devices. And so we get trouble. We run into issues if there's not enough bandwidth or enough juice coming to the house, right? If the internet service coming in, if that water pipe isn't big enough to supply all these devices, suddenly we can run out of water before we've even made it all the way to the sink at the other end of the house, right? But we can also, even if we do have enough bandwidth, a lot of people are getting gigabit plans these days, which are more than sufficient for most people's needs. You can still run into issues with the access point itself, running into processor or memory limitations, right? As they're constantly having to answer all of these calls from these dozens and dozens of devices, it can overwhelm it, and it can make it to where, we're constantly running in the red on what that device is capable of handling. Even if you have an overbuilt router, you can still run into network congestion and interference, right? One of my favorite analogies that I like to use is that using Wi-Fi is like having walkie-talkies, right? It's a very polite protocol, and everybody can only talk at one time. So if I'm talking on the walkie-talkie, I've got my button held down, right? And I'm talking, nobody else is able to talk while I'm talking, right? And then I have to say over and let go of the button, then the next device can connect, right? So if I've got 20, 30, 40 devices all talking at the same time, everybody's waiting for their turn to press down the button on the walkie-talkie so they can, take their turn to talk. More devices that you have, especially in a single access point system that only has a couple of antennas, it can start to overwhelm it pretty quickly, and you can run into a lot of congestion and interference. All of that could still be fine, and you can still run into what we call quality of service issues, where a lot of these, especially if we're dealing with like ISP provided combo units and stuff like that, their algorithms that they're using to try to manage and prioritize traffic can be a little bit either not sufficient for today's needs, or end up being brute force, and they're prioritizing a very specific application over another, and so it's not dynamic enough to meet the needs of everyday households these days, where the what I need from minute to minute can dramatically change. Whether I'm on a Zoom call, or I'm trying to stream a movie and then switching over to FaceTime, right? The traffic can vary wildly, and so needing to adjust and adjust quickly is super important. Naturally, one of the way that the Eero adjusts this is, like I mentioned, every Eero, because of our patented true mesh, every Eero is more like a router than a standalone access point, which then allows us to kind of share that burden, right? So we've now, every time that we add a node, we're able to support more devices concurrently. We're also able to share the processing resources to make sure that we're not getting overwhelmed, even in situations where we have hundreds of devices on a connected network at any given point in time. We also have what we call we use a smart queue management scheme. In the app, it's labeled as optimized for conferencing and gaming, but it's a little bit of a smarter algorithm than your traditional QoS scheme, where it can more effectively and adapt to the needs of a network at any given point in time. So that way it recognizes that, hey, these packets for an Xbox Live game or something are happening right now, but the moment that game stops and somebody now switches over to a FaceTime call, it can adjust and then start prioritizing that new task that's happening. So that way we can make sure that we've got reliable packet delivery at all times. Now, even other mesh networks can make sure that we've got fantastic coverage. Other mesh networks still can't use true mesh. True mesh is a patented thing that Eero has, where again, every node we're able to flexibly adjust our backhaul to make sure that we've got the best signal possible. But then we're also able to kind of share that burden of having to support all of these devices across multiple access points. Now, since I mentioned various different device types and device numbers, wanted to do a quick rundown of our lineup. We've got a bunch of different Eeros out there that can now handle a variety of different deployments at different price points to try to make sure that everybody's able to have a solution that meets their needs. So typically we've got kind of our Eero 6 on the low end, typically going to be for our lower speed thresholds, like under 500 works great for that one. It technically can punch above that. It can hit speeds in excess of 500, which means that if you set it up in a 500 or lower, you know that you're going to have a fantastic experience. With networks on that one being able to handle approximately 75 devices, in some cases more. The 6 Plus is in a very similar vein. Its main trick, though, is that it uses 160 megahertz channel width, so that way it can provide even faster speeds. So we're able to see speeds all the way up to a gigabit on that guy. Beyond that, though, once we start getting larger networks with more and more devices, or we're in that range of customers paying for a gigabit and they want a gigabit, or a lot of cases, these ISPs, you'll purchase 1 gigabit and they'll provision you 1.2, 1.3, or something like that. Pro 6E is fantastic at that. I'm paying for a gigabit and I want a gigabit, not to mention it can handle more concurrent devices. The Max 7 kind of sits as this new Halo tier offering that we have, where it's able to handle even multi-gig internet services. So if you've got 2, 4, 5 gigabit per second internet services these days, Max 7 can handle those, and it can do so with up to 200 concurrent devices. So we can make sure that we can handle even the highest end networking needs. Now, those are all fine and good, but most of what I expect here from this audience is going to be more better served with our more prosumer and or business oriented options. So we've got our PoE 6. This one, again, really, really great at trying to make sure that we can get darn near gigabit speeds off of Wi-Fi. We can handle 100 concurrent devices off of this guy. Its main trick, though, is that it can be powered over PoE, so we can have it, ceiling mounted in the hallway, make it, look like it's just there, part of the rest, like everything else, like the alarm, the smoke alarm, or anything else, right? We've also got our PoE gateway. So we mentioned before, as we kind of alluded to before, this device can power other PoE devices, as well as making sure that we can support speeds up to 10 gigabit per second on this guy, because it's got 2 10 gig ports and 2 2.5 gig ports. But we can also support really power hungry cameras. This guy can supports what's called PoE++, where we can supply up to 90 watts to a single device, right? So if you had like a really bulky PTZ camera, we can still power that guy. Now it's got a 100-watt power budget total, so that would take up most of its power budget, but you could power that with this guy, right? And then again, if we're talking, more prosumer or commercial segments, the Max 7 also makes sense here, just because it's just a monster right now. Really, really top of the line device that can handle, again, multi-gig deployments, as well as, even if we're talking like a small, medium business, right? A lot of cases, if we've got like a coffee shop or a hair salon or something like that, they're not going to have the desire or the time to stand up a dedicated IT staff. So being able to have a really robust, powerful system that's just going to work for everybody, that's easy to maintain and manage, ends up working out really, really well. Cool. So let's talk about some of the things that we do that make managing networks a little bit easier. We've got what's called our Eero for Pro Installers program. The idea here is to best support you guys, to make sure that we've got a great connection, make sure that we've got easy deployment. We're able to manage tons of customers concurrently. So we've got a unique app interface just for our pro installers. So as I create more and more networks, I can, send those networks off to the customer, so that way the customer can manage their stuff. But then I've got remote access to it, so that way if they call me 2 months later, right, I can still be able to pull up their network and try to assist them in any way, shape, or form, right? I can do this through the app interface, or we even have, for our pro installer market, we have a unique thing called Eero Insight, where you can actually monitor these networks through a traditional web browser, where you can actually manage and monitor these networks. Insight is extremely powerful. It allows us to see a ton of different statistics. We're able to see things like our wireless backhaul going to various Eeros. We can easily pull up our connection rate with our client devices. We can see if there happens to have been network outages, right? Maybe the service provider's dropping in and out. We could easily identify that. We can also identify maybe everything else is fine, but maybe one wireless access point, maybe one wireless Eero is dropping offline, right? We can troubleshoot that kind of stuff really, really easily through Insight. Fantastic, powerful tool that again is available to not available to the normal consumer base, but is available through our Eero for Pro installer program.
And Eero Insights allows me to go into the network that I just installed and see what's working well and what's not working well. And you can see the topology map. And I know it's getting a little nerdy here, but the idea here is you have access to all this information. But not only that, for the principals that are on here and even for the installers, when you utilize the Eero Dealer app and someone calls you and says, hey, I'm having a problem with the camera that you installed. Well, guess what? Before they finish that sentence, you're opening up the dealer app, you're clicking on that customer's network, and you're checking to see, is that network okay before getting into your car and driving over there, right? So you're preventing a truck roll by utilizing the dealer app because you're factoring in, is the Wi-Fi okay? And if the Wi-Fi is not okay, or if it's dropped off, you know, we hear this all the time whenever you call support, unplug it and plug it back in so it can get a new IP address, and that usually resolves it. Most of the time, it's not the device that is encountering issues. It's usually lost a connection to the router. So Eero Insights through the Eero Pro Installer app prevents that, right? And it allows you to manage.
One of the things that this is showing and that you have the ability to see is actually a history. This screen right here, I believe it is. You've got a history to be able to see when an access point has been online or when an access point was offline. If you have devices that are having connectivity issues, or maybe it's just gone offline completely, you can look in here and actually see, oh, well, that access point is offline or was offline yesterday, and that's why that your devices weren't working. So this right here is gold. So
absolutely. And by the way, if you're wondering, we don't charge anything for this. This is absolutely free. All you have to do is sign up on pro.eero.com, sign up to be a dealer, and you have access to this. And just so we're on the same page, and I know I'm talking to a lot of security resellers, you can charge whatever you want for this. So you can charge your customer $5 a month, $10 a month to do network monitoring, and you have access to their network through Eero Insight, through the Eero Pro Installer app. So you can be very creative on how you approach the network with your end user, your customer, right? And like I said, we're not charging you anything for this app. You just got to sign up. And how do you do that? If you have your phone, you're more than welcome to scan that. But essentially, it's pro.eero.com. You can go in. You can sign up to be an approved Eero reseller / installer. Once you have that up and running, you can then go into the Eero Insights or the Eero Pro Installer app that I just showed you. And you can now have access to all that information for your customer's network, all right? Application does usually take 72 hours, but again, for everyone on the call, I'd highly encourage you to go in and sign up. And, once you have that, you can obviously see what's going on with your customer's network and kind of take it from there.
And then, of course, one of the perks that you also get if you're a pro installer is that we've got dedicated US-based support. So if you're having issues with either your account, trying to figure out how the tools work or anything like that, or if you've got a really a difficult network issue that one of your customers is having issues with, we have dedicated support free of charge that's able to help you work through any of those issues that you might run into as well.
So we do have a few minutes left. Let's talk about how we can make Eero the experience better. So the first thing is sets up in minutes. If it takes you longer, usually they say 5 minutes, but I'll be nice here, 10 to 15 minutes to install this, they're doing something wrong. Eero, that's actually our claim to fame in the pro channel, is that we're incredibly easy to set up and we just work. The failure rate at Eero is actually incredibly low. Quick installation. And here's the other thing, you're talking about a mainstream product. And I always like to say, whenever you offer a product, people do a quick Google search. And like I mentioned, we are rated the #1 mesh Wi-Fi system in the United States. So when they do a quick Google search because they've never heard of Eero, and they see that, hey, CNET and all these other companies or reviewers have rated us the best, that makes them feel better inside of what you're offering them as well. The other cool thing is that in the dealer app, we will actually help you place the nodes. So I'm sure you've been hearing the recurring theme of where to place the access point. As you can see, starting from left to right, we'll tell you, hey, the first one, it's not looking too good. Let's move that a little bit closer, right? The second screenshot shows you that, hey, you're there, but you're not fully there. And then the last two are telling you these are the best two scenarios on how to set it up. But for those of you wondering on the call, how do I do the placement? The Eero app will help you do that, right? And again, the idea here is we're trying to make this as simple as possible so that you're not sitting there struggling. And like I said, this all happens within the next 10 to 15 minutes after you've opened the box. So the other thing is, when someone says, I don't know how fast my internet provider gives me or I think I'm being shorted, great. Well, one, you can go in, you can run a speed test within the Eero app, and you can see in real time what the hardwired speed is for your ISP. And I want to be clear on when I said hardwired, that's the one that's connected to the modem or the ONT box if you have fiber, and that's getting you the true speed from the ISP. That's something you can actually show to your customer if you choose to do so, but it also eliminates any issues. And again, this is available through Eero Insights. We do automatic updates, which you can set up in the middle of the night. Mine is specifically set up for 3 a.m. so that nothing is really disturbed. And the other thing is we can do things like guest networks as well. So if you have an additional SSID, you can put that where your end user or your customer can get to them, and a guest network kind of comes into play there. So that's something you can definitely utilize as well. We also, if you have Eero Plus, which you can, that's something that you will have to purchase through Eero. You can do things like content filtering. So if you don't want your children or even your spouse on sites that they shouldn't be on, you can do that with content filtering. We have something called internet backup, where if your ISP goes down, we have a way for you to attach that to your phone or tablet or anywhere where you can get 5G or a 4G LTE backup. You can attach that to the router so that you can continue getting connectivity, which is important, especially in a security setup as well. And then we also have partner apps where you get password managers. My personal favorite is VPN. For those of you that are not familiar with VPN, which is virtual private network, it gives you an additional layer of security for your network in general to ensure that you're not hacked or anyone else can see you. And then you have the antivirus solution as well. The last thing I want to talk about, because I know we're pretty much at time, is we actually have something called Eero for Business. So if you want to install Eero devices into a small business like a bar, restaurant, nail salon, you can do that utilizing the same devices that we offer today through our partners, through distributions like ADI. And you would just get the Eero for Business software. Why is that important? There's a couple of things that happen. One, you don't need a network administrator, which no one wants to have an additional person on their payroll to have monitoring their network. Two, you get actually a captive portal A captive portal is essentially the terms and conditions. For those of you that go into restaurants or airports, you get that little first screen that says, do you agree to these terms and conditions? That's to ensure that the owner of that business, the proprietor, is not held accountable if they go on a website that they shouldn't be on. You can also do multiple SSIDs. So, one for your customers, one for your staff, one for your POS, and one for your backup. You can do up to 4 to ensure that you get the best coverage. And obviously you don't want your customer on the same as your point of sale system in a restaurant or bar or anything like that. So this is an additional feature that we offer. And I want to thank everyone who attended. I hope all of this made sense. And we're going to have another webinar tomorrow to talk more from a business perspective. And I hope you can join that one as well. And I'll hand it back to you, Troy.
Yeah, thank you, Adil. There's great information there, and I've learned a lot. These 2 different webinars, I've actually learned a lot about my network, things that it will do, things that it won't do. Thank you for attending. I really think this is something that's good for not just technicians. This is something that, knowing about these placements and different things are good for your sales team as well. So again, thank you for attending. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for attending Tech Talk with Troy today. We hope you found the session enlightening, and we look forward to you implementing these practices in your business. Keep an eye on your inbox for our next session's invite, and here's to your continued success.